on our promise to invest in infrastructure, children, and schools. Our team is reviewing the bills that the General Assembly has sent to our desk, and as we speak, we look forward to signing some of this legislation in the coming weeks. But I've said before, there's still work to be done. So that's why today I'm calling for the General Assembly to come back to Jefferson City on Monday, June 2nd, 2025 at 12 p.m. for a special session. I've spoken with leadership on both chambers and on both sides of the aisle, and I'm optimistic that we can work together to make this time count and use the rare opportunity to benefit the future of our state. The special session will be focused on three main components: providing additional resources to families affected by the recent severe storms, driving economic development through a tax incentive program, and making critical budget appropriations that will impact Missourians across this state. First of all, in disaster assistance, 4 severe storms have impacted the state of Missouri over the recent months since March, resulting in loss of life as well as significant damage to homes, businesses, and public infrastructure. Most recently, on May 16th, severe storms and tornadoes took the lives of 7 Missourians and impacted the livelihoods of many in the St. Louis area and in the southeast Missouri region. I have visited these impacted areas from the May 16th storm multiple times now, and the true spirit of Missourian is shown in times like this. Neighbors stepping up to help neighbors. First responders in these communities are absolute heroes. Those men and ladies have done things that most people could have never imagined, whether it's a professional firefighter, policeman, volunteer firefighter. The first responder community, I have to tell you, has just been amazing in these storms, and I think they deserve a lot of credit. They are the unsung heroes. I'd like to say thank you to our state emergency management agency, SEMA, and their team for all the work they do to assist these local communities. Truly amazing work, and they've worked very well with the local emergency managers in those affected areas, all the way back to the March storms, through the April flooding, to the storms we just saw last week. The local emergency managers have done a very good job in working with our emergency management team. And the state is working with local officials and affected communities, and we have engaged FEMA and the federal government for further assistance. And as you've heard, we have partial response from the March storms last week and some response for that April storm, and we've also applied for the tornadoes from last week to the White House this week. The federal government is hoping to join us for further assistance. And just this past Sunday, as I mentioned, we submitted another disaster declaration for the May 16th storm to President Trump. I want to thank our federal delegation, both our U.S. senators and all of our congresspeople, no matter if they're in an affected area of the state or not, have been very willing to help and deliver the message of need, specifically in the St. Louis area with Congresswoman Ann Wagner and Wesley Bell have been incredible. Jason Smith largely covers that southeast Missouri area who've been good. But even Mark Alford Graves, Congressman Cleaver, they've all been very willing to help us, as well as obviously U.S. Senator Hawley and U.S. Senator Schmidt. I can't tell you how great they've been. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to our local elected officials, whether it's last week in St. Louis or 2 months ago in Piedmont, Missouri, or yesterday in Scott County, state senators, state representatives. They're not wearing blue and red jerseys, by the way. They're showing up at these events trying to make sure they can do what it takes to help. And I can't tell you how proud I am of our state senators and state representatives for all the work they've done in these communities. And last but not least, the county officials, whether it's the county commissioners in some of our rural communities, mayors in some of our larger community. Mayor Spencer, huge shout out to her in St. Louis. As I've said all the time, the tornadoes hit on day 32 of her administration. Not many people get prepared for what she was seeing. Met with her again yesterday, actually, in St. Louis. Her and her team, and she will give a lot of credit to her first responders, police, firefighters, city crews that are cleaning up. In my old neighborhood of St. Louis have done a really good job. So a big credit to our local elected officials who are jumping in, helping these people. Our call for the special session first includes assistance for Missouri families impacted by recent severe storms this spring. We are asking the General Assembly to consider legislation establishing the income tax deduction for the insurance policy deductible incurred by homeowners and renters. This financial relief would be capped at $5,000 per household per disaster per calendar year. This program will continue after these storms for future storms this year as well. And legislation enhancing the utility of the Missouri Housing Trust Fund administered by the Missouri Housing Development Commission, or as you know, MHDC, by expanding eligibility and removing administrative burdens and costs to expedite aid for Missouri families with the disaster housing response grants. These, as you know, are largely for uninsured and underinsured families. We would like to see the legislature expand the eligibility threshold for Missouri families from the current 50% mark for regional average median income to the 75% mark, which will allow more affected Missourians to apply for emergency housing assistance, home repair, and construction grants. This program is currently funded by the recording fees for real estate documents filed in the state of Missouri. So it's a program established, ready to go. We don't have to reestablish something. To help MHDC fund these additional grants due to the large number of impacted Missourians, we're asking the General Assembly to appropriate $25 million in general revenue, which would be available to applicants on a first-come, first-served basis. Missourians who live in an area that has been included in the multiple requests for presidential disaster declaration would be considered for these resources. We believe these steps will greatly impact the thousands of Missourians whose homes have been destroyed or damaged in this unfortunate series of weather that has touched almost every corner of this state. In the tax incentive category, our call for this special session also includes the tools to help our economic development efforts, including extending the sunset on the existing amateur sports tax credits, which are critically important to multiple cities and regions across the state. And to help retain our major sports teams in Missouri, we are calling the General Assembly to enact legislation that modifies tax incentives for sporting events. The Kansas City Chiefs and Royals are Missouri's teams. They are Missouri's teams, and they drive billions of dollars in economic activity through tourism, job creation, and small business, including hotels, restaurants, and retails. Our Show Me Sports Investment Act will independently allow the Kansas City Chiefs and Royals to bond an annual appropriation value to their current Missouri state tax revenues. This program was introduced at the end of the regular session and received very strong support from the House of Representatives. And this just isn't about football and baseball. As I said before, this is about economic development. This is two organizations that have businesses, employees, and a ripple effect on our state's economy that we do not want to move to any other state. The Kansas City Chiefs' current stadium generates $28.8 million in annual tax revenue for the state of Missouri, over 4,500 jobs, and $572.3 million in economic activity just in Jackson County alone. A new Royals ballpark district is estimated to support 8,400 jobs, provide $400 million in labor income from new jobs annually, and generate $1.2 billion in economic output from district operations annually. For months, we have worked with legislators, local leaders, and teams to make sure that Missouri has a competitive package on the table. We believe this financing tool, the Show Me State Sports Investment Act, is a competitive offer, but also a good deal for Missouri taxpayers. The money dedicated for the bond payments are up to the amount of revenues historically generated by the teams. This is the same amount of revenue the state stands to lose if either team relocates to any other state. But local support is still critical in this effort, and this plan will require local contributions. So I'm asking legislators to work with us to keep these businesses in the state where they belong, the state of Missouri. On the appropriations front, our call includes some critical appropriations that didn't make it across the finish line this past session, including $25 million in general revenue for the Radioscope Science Center, or the University of Missouri Research Reactor, or MUR, as most people call it. MUR has developed life-saving medicines for patients around the world, and Missouri is proud to be home to this incredible nuclear resource. When you go into the lobby of MUR, there's a digital clock that shows how many lives they save a day by the radioisotopes they develop in that facility. It's an amazing impression when you walk in there. We are also calling for the legislature to consider non-general revenue appropriations. These projects would include funding for the new 200-bed mental health hospital in Kansas City, a new crime lab for Highway Patrol Troop E, new livestock and stalling barns at the Missouri State Fairgrounds, and various projects at state parks and Missouri National Guard facilities across the state. So as legislators return to Jefferson City next week, I hope they will find common ground on these priorities for our state. So I want to say to them, as a farmer legislature, I know it can be tough to move on from disagreements and failed negotiations, but we must. As I said in our State of the State address, Missourians didn't send us here to work for ourselves. We are here to serve them. The relationship we build here and the way we treat each other is far more important than any praise, headline, or social media viral moment. I look forward to the General Assembly's consideration of these proposals, and I'm happy to take a few questions.
And on its face, do any of these by themselves warrant a special session if it was just one issue?
Yeah, I mean, as you know from other special sessions, and we've said this multiple times, maybe with the same group of folks, governors from both parties, by the way, over the last several years have called special sessions when it has been very large economic development packages. So there's obviously some time sensitivity to our economic development package, and the unfortunate incident we've had with the storms, I think, is a very time-sensitive issue as well. So we believe that those are indeed grounds for being special and unique to bring folks back to consider. And they definitely have a time back to them.
And as bad as the storm damage has been, is it more critical to get the Chiefs Royals part done by June 30th?
Well, I don't know that I would weigh just that. Unfortunately, the Storms didn't know about that deadline with the Chiefs and Royals. The Storms came as they came. Just coincidentally happened to where we felt the damage was significant enough to ask the General Assembly for more relief for those families. And so I believe that's an appropriate thing to do.
Going back a bit on the savings plan, why did you decide to push for that plan so late in the legislative session in the final week?
Yeah, all along, to be honest with you, I thought the package was significant enough that it may ultimately require a special session as we were developing it. But we really didn't have kind of the cake baked until the last couple of weeks of session with agreement from the teams and stakeholders and different people. And I don't want to represent that there's an agreement from the team, maybe I shouldn't use that word, just an understanding of what a competitive offer should look like. They'll still have to make a decision. But we wanted to get our ducks in a row, and as I've said from the very beginning, the offer that we put forward has to be a good deal for Missourians. I said that in here. It has to be a good return on investment for Missourians as well. And so making sure we had that right balance didn't kind of get all worked out until very late in April and the beginning of May.
Governor, you mentioned one special general revenue project in your appropriations list, the money from the MER, which is half of what you had asked for originally. Are you telling legislators you will veto additional earmarked general revenue items in an appropriation bill?
First of all, Rudy, I want you to know the light over your head has a halo effect. And I don't know if you ever envisioned. I didn't know you've ever envisioned that. That's a great question. To be honest with you, we know the state budget years ahead are going to be challenging, and the amount of general revenue that we have is something that I'm taking very seriously as a businessman and what it's going to take in future years. You might coincidentally notice that the amount for MER is half, as you mentioned, and then there's an appropriate same amount going to storm relief.
Is the entirety of the projects that were within House Bill 19, are they going to all be a part of this new package, or is it just going to be some?
As I mentioned, in what we're going to be calling, I think it's going to be Senate Bill number 1. These all three bills, in case you want to know, the leaders agreed that would start in the Senate. The appropriations bill, let's just call it that, will be the non-general revenue, all of the non-general revenue components, and as I mentioned, there's several of them in there. The mental health hospital, some bond payments, state parks issues, the crime lab in Cape, et cetera, as well as 2 GR proposals. One would be 25 for MER, and one would be 25 million for MHDC.
So, what is the total dollar amount that what used to be House Bill 19 was about 500 million? What's the dollar amount?
Yeah, I think the bill, Dave, I'm going a little bit from, this will make my staff very nervous, I'm going from memory. I believe the bill the Senate sent to the House that didn't get taken up, the old, what we call the old HB 19, was around 520, if I recall. I'm almost sure 320 million of that was general revenue projects. So I'm just doing the math in my head. Non-GR projects were around 200 million, I think. We can get you those numbers specifically, but that's pretty close, I think.
Governor, I'd like to ask you, how confident are you that the Royals and the Chiefs will remain in the state of Missouri?
Well, I've talked to not only the owners of both the teams multiple times, but their management, and they have some significant options on the table. And I believe if Missouri does not put some sort of offer forward, I'm not speaking for either of those teams, I think the risk is real that they don't stay here. I believe that the package that we can present to them, again, with the help of the local communities, will be serious enough for them to give it great consideration.
And
Is there a
as far
sense-
as assistance for the tornado victims, is that going to be enough funding?
We'll have to see how that goes. You know, the disaster area, I think y'all saw in the news release that it was either FEMA or SEMA, I'm sorry, I forget which alphabet soup, and I don't say that despairingly, mentioned that the structural damage in North St. Louis is worse than the Joplin tornado. And unfortunately, a lot of uninsured and underinsured homes. And as I mentioned, those areas, Fountain Park, the Ville, et cetera, are just within blocks of where I grew up. So I'm really familiar with those areas. And we're going to need a huge effort. But I want to say this. Government can't solve everybody's problems on these disasters. We have seen incredible help from what we call NGO, non-government organizations, churches, charities, nonprofit organizations. We just had a call earlier with the SAVE Coalition, which is a group of engineers and architects who, as volunteers, put over 2,000 hours and inspected over 3,000 structures in St. Louis to come up with the structural integrity of the homes up there. It's going to take a lot of coalitions like that, Mark, and others, so you know, to help solve some of these communities, whether that's in Scott County, St. Louis, Piedmont, any of the affected areas, Poplar Bluff. It's going to be a combination of resources, local communities, volunteers, nonprofits. A lot of religious organizations have done amazing jobs to help these people. It's not going to be just one thing that fixes the problems. It's massive.
Among the lawmakers who may be Chiefs and Royals fans but are very fiscally conservative, are you getting any pushback at all? Saying, I love the Chiefs, I love the Royals, but let's don't give them any tax.
Well, that's what the sessions is for. The legislature will have to determine that, and certainly it doesn't matter what part of the state you represent or live in, the economic impact from those businesses. I would again ask those legislators to consider these businesses like a manufacturing operation. If they move out of our state, the significant effect it's going to have on our state's economy is massive. And so I just would ask them to consider that. Just like any other bill we have, whether it was the GM bill, the Boeing bill, the Google, Ford, the different special sessions we've had for economic development the last several years, I'd ask them to consider that. We had over here, I'm sorry.
So the Senate seemed to be caught off guard a little bit by the introduction of that legislation. We're still unhappy about House Bill 19 being banged. Have you guys had conversations the last couple of weeks with some of the Senate leadership about what it would take to get that tax incentive program passed? And were these programs specifically selected because you think that'll help nudge the tax incentive program over the finish line?
Well, I've definitely talked to leadership in both chambers on both sides of the aisles, as I mentioned in my comments. This building is interesting that there are some raw nerves out there and some wounded feelings. And I'm asking them to consider that these initiatives that we will put before them are very time sensitive and very needy, especially when it comes to the disaster relief. So I think it's appropriate to put these forward and let the legislature try to do what it does and rebuild those relationships to the extent possible, but understand that the need, whether it's in a disaster community or on the economic development end, is very real and very time sensitive.
And where's your confidence that the Senate will move forward with these? Did you feel like this is an early test of your administration?
You know, I talked to Senate leadership, specifically Doug Beck and some other senators. Let me tell you, Carla May and Steve Roberts, senators, I should say, up in St. Louis, have been incredible in their efforts in the St. Louis area. You know, I'm not asking them to forget. That's not what this is about. The Senate is the Senate. It's a very deliberative body that has a lot of great people in it, but it has very strong personalities. And I certainly understand that there, like I said, there's a few open wounds, but I'm also asking them to consider the tragedy that some of these families have faced in these disasters.
Governor, in a major disaster declaration, when the president agrees to that, you don't always get individual assistance for people, but you always get help for rebuilding infrastructure so that government costs are shared. Can the state absorb the kind of costs that it's facing and help local governments if FEMA doesn't come through?
Yeah, and to your point, Rudy, every storm we ask for both PA public assistance and I individual assistance. Specifically, the response in the White House last week on the March storms, which was 14-15, both of those categories were approved. And then on the early April storms, Rudy, I'll call those mainly the flooding events, which was specific to that. The public assistance has been approved and the individual assistance is still pending. We've requested it. We will request both of those again for the tornado events that we had last week. And our federal delegation is going to work really hard with the White House. And I will tell you that me personally, I've been on the phone, and Adam Gresham in our office and others have been on the phone with the White House constantly on these events. The day of the tornadoes, a week ago last Saturday at 8 a.m., Kristi Noem called me to ask me what they could do to help. Secretary Noem has been really good to work with as a former governor. I'm very familiar with her and appreciate her weighing in. And then that afternoon, the president called me and asked me what was going on. So being able to it's not a guarantee any of those things happen, but because of our federal delegation and their relationships they have with this administration, we're going to work as hard as we can to get those categories approved on those storms.
Will Missouri, as a state, be able to provide to the local governments the assistance if FEMA does not?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure that the county government, the city government, or the state government is always going to be all the answers. There'll be multiple resources we'll try to make with nonprofits available to those, and it's really too early to say until we know what those positions are going to be, what we'll be able to do or not able to do.
What do you make of the fact that there hasn't been an okay yet on the funding for federal aid regarding the tornadoes?
Well, I'm very happy that we got what we got because you saw some other states not get approved. So it unfortunately takes a little longer than as a small business guy I like sometimes, but we're grateful the response we've gotten so far, and we'll keep pushing. As you know, we've also, for this St. Louis and Southeast Missouri tornado event, have asked for upfront assistance. We haven't gotten an answer on that yet, but it's certainly something I've talked to the Secretary and the President personally about.
Do you have a deadline in mind, for this special session, when you'd like this stuff to get?
No, I am, as a former member of the legislature, I would not want to put a deadline on those men and ladies. It's not what I think this position should do. I respect their process and their relationship building, and I'm optimistic they'll try to work together.
The U.S. House passed a bill that would reduce some SNAP and Medicaid benefits. If this passes all the way, do you anticipate raising state funding for those?
Yeah, you've seen Senator Hawley be very open on what that bill looks like as it comes to the Senate. I know that the intent of the bill as it came through the House was to make sure the people who actually need those benefits are getting it, and anybody who's getting it that don't deserve it in whatever manner, it helps clean up those rolls. Certainly that's the way for most government programs that I would want. I would want the people who really need it to get it, and the people who don't qualify for it and somehow are still getting it to maybe be cleaned up. That's the intent of the House bill. I know Senator Hawley, I've talked to him multiple times, and other senators have said the same thing. They'll very much be keeping an eye on how that affects, in our case, Missourians, and make sure that we have the safeguards in place.
On the stadiums, what is the value, the dollar value you put on the state's potential outlay?
Well, let's first talk about what we believe the investment will be. Both the Royals have said this publicly, and the Chiefs have said publicly what remodeling Arrowhead to, we think, an iconic stadium similar to what Lambeau Field would be, just an iconic place to go watch football. But both of those two projects combined, a new baseball stadium and a new football stadium, and this has been very public, is somewhere in $2.5 billion with a B range up to $3 billion. So we believe that impact just from the construction of those stadiums alone will be massive in the amount of impact from the construction of those jobs. As you heard me say that the bonding payments, and Dave, I'll get you the specific numbers. What our goal would be is to allow them to keep a portion of the current tax that they send us over a 30-year period, and I think that's important. We want to make sure we don't get in a situation like we had in St. Louis where we're committed to something and all of a sudden the team moves, so a 30-year period is significant. We would have the 30-year deal on there, and any of the net new that they collect would still be part of the state. And as you know, player salaries and revenues have not gone down in the last 10 or 15 years. So we think there again, the investment for Missourians is good because we'll keep the net new. If we let them keep a portion of the proceeds they're sending in now, and I'll get you the exact numbers, it's roughly in the high 20 millions for the Chiefs and in the 15-ish million, I shouldn't even say these numbers for the Royals. Anything above that we'll still get to keep. And as we see player salaries, the cost of the beer, parking, anything you mentioned that goes up above that, it would be for the state. And I would say over the next 30 years, most of those salaries and cost items will go up. And so the state would receive that sales tax. And if they're not here, we won't receive anything.
So,
Yes.
So you've mentioned earlier in the year that you were going to implement a DOGE-style program for the state government. One of the impacts that at the federal level DOGE had was on disaster relief and on FEMA. Is this kind of showing that disaster relief is an area where you are or are not going to focus on?
Yeah, we still are working on our Show Me Doge program. We felt it was important to get our other issues through session, specifically public safety and a few other things that were very important to get done. The business leaders, as I mentioned in my State of the State speech, have now come forward and they're starting to offer some of their C-suite executives, I'll call it, as volunteers to come help us in their expertise in areas that we identify in state government. So we fully anticipate having more details on that in the coming months on what that's going to look like after we get through bill review and some of the other things. So we think that's very important. But I've said all along, whenever the federal government starts saying they're going to look at ways they're spending money, as a small business person and as a taxpayer, I very much believe that we need to right-size government and make sure those critical pieces of expenditures that the Trump administration specifically is looking at are the best value for the citizens paying those taxes. So sometimes it comes with a little bit of pain, but we need to work through that and be partners in that and make sure that Missourians in this case and folks across the country, their taxpayer dollars aren't being wasted.
One last question on the stadium. If the Senate, or if the legislature doesn't pass this tax incentive program, is there a path forward to keeping the teams here, given the Star Bonds proposal that's out there in Kansas, or does that pretty much wrap it up for what Missouri can attempt to do?
No, as I mentioned forward, it would pretty much wrap up what the Missouri portion would be, but the county and or counties, depending on what the Royals end up doing, they would still have to work on a piece for them. And I've talked to county leaders in both Jackson and Clay County just in case. We don't know where the Royals will go. I've read the media reports like you have. But certainly leaders in Jackson County as well as Clay County are aware that they will still have to participate in this. And I think that's appropriate, by the way. I think there has to be a partnership with the teams and with the counties that they locate in as well as the state.
We've got time for one more.
Just want to be clear, in the call on the appropriations, can you limit the amount of general revenue that is available for legislators? Can you limit the types of projects that they can consider? Because you've got folks like the Shelter Workshop in Salem that's looking for money to rebuild and all the other things that the legislature added.
Well, first of all, let me tell you, I'm the world's biggest fan of our sheltered workshops. I think you guys know I've been to almost every one of the 75 workshops, and I love what they do in our communities. To answer your question more specifically, Rudy, we believe that we can limit the amount of GR, and so we will be working on what that looks like from a legal perspective in our call.
All right, thank you all.
Appreciate you guys coming. Thank you. Thank you, guys.